Watagwan, and welcome to Sifting for Soul. In this vlog, I'm going to take you through my workflow in Lightroom for a landscape photo. The photo that we're going to use is an image of St. James Bank in Edinburgh, Scotland. You'll see the before and the after, and you'll see the steps that I do in between to get it there. The video is about 25 minutes, but it's because I'm explaining everything. If you adopt a similar workflow, you could probably get an image done in like 7 minutes. So check it out. And as always, let's get it.
All right. We're going to do a tutorial today for you, and I'm going to show you how to take a shot that starts like this. You might think the shot looks pretty good right here. You got some nice shadow detail, not a whole lot, but you got some. You can make out what this is. This is in Edinburgh in Scotland, but we're going to take it so that it looks more like this. This is a little closer to what my eye sees and a lot cleaner, a lot straighter. So right here to right here. So not going to do too many heavy things. This is really and this is really representative of the flow that I use on, I'd say 85% of my shots. It doesn't take a really long time. I could actually even do an action that does most of these things for me, but I'm still sort of fine tuning my preferences, and I like to do one at a time. There are some shortcuts that you can use, and I'll show you that in a later vlog. But with that, let's dig right in. So I'm assuming you're a beginner or an early editor, so maybe spent a lot of time with your camera, but you're still new to editing. So if you don't know how to import into Lightroom, I did a video for that. Check that out in the link in the description. And I'm going to assume you're already imported, you have them in your library on the left here, and then you're ready to get started. So I scan through the image and then just giving you sort of an overview of what we're doing. We're in the library module, so that's in the top right. There's also the developer module. These are the primary modules that we're going to use, mostly the developer module. In the library module, you have different functions on the left here in the navigator pane, or in this left pane that also has a navigator. It's basically just my library, and just like it sounds, it's like navigating through the location of the image and the catalog, etc., etc. Import and export at the bottom. On the right, I have information about this image, so I'm not really changing too many things. I can add a keyword, but I show you how to use keywords in the other video that I referenced in the link. One of the things that's useful here is I have some metadata about this image, the original photo. So I can see that I shot this with ISO 100 and I shot it at 59 millimeters. And then I have a shutter or an aperture of f/16. That becomes important because I know that if this lens isn't image stabilized, then I can scroll down here and see which lens it is. So I have a Canon 5DSR, and this is the 24-70 version 2, which is not image stabilized. I know all this information, but I'm of course showing you how to check it. And then, so if I look back over here under the histogram tab, I can see that I'm at 59 millimeters, so like roughly 60 millimeters. And that means the slowest I should try to handhold this is 1/60th of a second. And so I'm at 30 seconds for a shutter speed. So of course I wasn't hand holding this, I was on a tripod, but the metadata can become useful to you if you're like, oh, I'm getting close, so I need to sort of punch in and then see if this is crispy where I want it to be crispy, or if I've got some blur from moving my hand. That actually looks pretty good to me, and I expect it to be so. Remember, even on a tripod, you can get some blur, especially at 30 seconds if your tripod moves a little bit, et cetera, et cetera. And so I punched in, so I'm just going to come back over here, punched in meaning zoomed in. I'm going to come over here to the left, and under the navigator window, I'm just going to click fit again. And then also, if I wanted to see the metadata, I can hit Command I, and then I can see the metadata in the top left corner. So it tells me 30 seconds at an aperture of f/16 at ISO 100. I know what you're wondering. You're like, B, in your other videos, I was listening to you and you told me to shoot at f22. That's kind of a guideline. I shoot pretty much above f13. And the reason I do that is because if you zoom in here, you get these nice little starburst on the lights, because when you shoot at a stop down aperture, you get like the blades close in, and then light bleeds between the edges of the blades, which is why you get these little bleed lines here, which are great. So I shoot at f13 and above, and I often shoot at f22, but in really, really low light situations, depending on how long I want to be there, maybe I want a shutter speed of 30 seconds. I don't really want a shutter speed of 2 minutes. And so I will use a wider aperture to give me a shutter speed of 30 seconds if that's what I want, which is what I did in this case. Alternatively, I could boost the ISO, but as you recall, I do not like ISO noise. So you've already seen how to zoom in. One of the ways to zoom in, which is sort of clicking on a place in the image, which I did here. If you click on it again, it zooms you out. You can also click on another place in an image, and right now I'm zooming in at roughly 1:1 over here on the left. In the navigator pane, I can change that zoom in. So I can say, hey, I actually want you to zoom in at 1:2, and then notice what it does to the zoom. I can move this window around. So if I click over here under the navigator pane, I can move around what is actually in zoom. And then I can also do Command plus and zoom in more, or Command minus and zoom out. So those are a couple useful features for you. And then on the right, I have, as I mentioned, just sort of information and metadata when I'm in the library tab. So that's pretty much all I want to see there. I'm going to hit Command I again because I find that a little bit annoying and distracting. And now I'm actually going to start editing this photo. And just make sure all of the image is in. So notice when I Command minus to zoom out, I still have this right edge is not fully in the frame. So I click Fit so that I can see all of my image. Cool. So now I click on the Develop tab. And in the Develop tab, now I can actually make some changes. And so before I make any changes, the very first thing I do is I hover over the image selected in the bottom, and I right click and I choose Create Virtual Copy. I do this because it basically uses data to track the changes that I'm doing to a file, but it doesn't actually change the file under the cover. So this is a much more efficient way to do things. It also allows me to make a mistake and to revert the change very inexpensively. So this is efficient on memory and space on the system, and it's quite a nice feature. So I always start creating a virtual copy. As you can see, I've made a few virtual copies because I've already edited this, but I'm going to walk you through how I would normally edit it. Cool. So I have my virtual copy, and I checked the metadata already. So then I always start in the right side, and I scroll down to the bottom. And the first thing I can do, if we have a grid on here, you can see that this looks like it's leaning a little bit. So the line on the left here looks like it's leaning. This looks like it's leaning. So the first thing I need to do is straighten this image out. And I can do that under Transform by clicking Auto. And Auto does a pretty good job of straightening it out for me. And then if you think it's going to crop the image, you can also hit Constrain Crop, and that'll take care of that for you. And then I scroll up, and then I want to remove any chromatic aberration. And then I also want to enable profile correction. Now, one of the things to notice is it usually knows what kind of lens and what kind of gear I have. The problem with this shot is I process this in camera, so I technically don't need to do this, but I like to do it anyway. So I select Canon, and then it does detect that I have the 2470, and then the profile that it uses is the Canon profile for that. And so there I have remove chromatic aberration, and I have enable profile correction set. And so I already like this better. And so if I hit the backslash key, I'll see my before and my after. So mainly sort of straightening it and then correcting a little bit of distortion. So if you look at the tower, it looks like it has been straightened out a little bit, inflated a little bit even. Cool. So those are the first two things that I do. And then I come out. If this is a night shot, and so if I'm worried about noise, I can boost luminance a little bit. The noise would show up like in the sky. That sky actually looks pretty good to me. So I'm not going to do anything with luminance right now. I am going to scroll up to the top. And for night shots, I almost always do this combination of things. So first, I will kill the highlights. I kill the highlights. Usually I take them all the way down. In this case, all the way down doesn't look quite right to me, so I'm not going to bring them all the way down. I'm going to bring them to like -59. And then I usually boost the clarity. So however far I bring the highlights, I bring the clarity about there, maybe a little bit less. Then I boost the shadows, and you got to be careful with boosting the shadows because that can introduce some noise. And then I will boost the exposure a little bit. And I will also boost the vibrance. So the vibrance really helps some of the colors come out. And then I will also boost the saturation. So that I like to make my night shots almost look like candy. And this is, so it might feel like cheating. You're like, oh, it wasn't that saturated, or it wasn't that vibrant, or the highlights didn't look like that. There are a couple things to keep in mind. First, the camera doesn't actually get what's there. It gets its impression of the light that's hitting its sensor of what's there. Your eye doesn't actually get what's there. Your eye gets its impression of the light hitting your eye. So it's not really cheating as much as extracting the details that are important to you from the image. And you can do a version of this as well. If you focus on something, you will get a lot of detail from that thing, but you will lose detail on everything else that you're not focusing on. Is that to say that those things that you're not focusing on don't have detail? It doesn't have those colors? Of course not. It's just to say that you're not focusing on them. So that's how I think of this. Excellent. So sometimes I boost the contrast. I'm okay with the contrast in this image. And so we are pretty good here. And so you could call this done. So let's take a look at before. So before, we've got some blown out highlights, and they look a bit, and we've got some shadows that are too dark. So it's like stark contrast between the lights and the darks. And then after, yeah, we've got some detail coming in, and that looks pretty good. So we could stop here, and that's certainly fine if you want to do that. There's a bit more that I want to do to this image. This image is quite yellow, which is not very pleasing to me. The night tends to be cooler and bluer, so I will drop the temperature of the shot a bit, and that's over here on the temp slide. And I'm just going to drag that down until it suits my taste, until it's a bit more consistent with what a cool Edinburgh night feels like to me. So here we got a little too blue maybe in there. So we can dial it back, and you can do localized. I think that's okay for what I'm after. And now if I want to do a bit of localized changes. So all of these, I'm in the basic panel, and then all the changes that I've made are to the entire image. So now I want to go a little bit more localized, and I will take something like the brush tool. So I click on it, and then I have it selected. I have under this drop down, I have dodge selected, and I am going to lighten, and so my exposure is going to be boosted by 25. I'm actually going to make that a little bit more pronounced. And then let's see, you can maybe boost the shadows a little bit as well. So boost those here. And so let's see if we can recover some of the detail that's in here. Cool. And so if you want to see where you're drawing, you can come down to the bottom of the image and click Show Selected Mask Overlay. And sort of paint it there. Now that red masking is just showing me where I'm painting. And then I want to bring out some of the shadow in here. I'm careful not to go over the lights because, of course, I don't want to make those any brighter than they need to be. They're already pretty bright. Get this tree a little bit. And you can do this until your heart's content. And so you get a sense of some of the things that you can do. And so this is sort of, I will do this or something like this to my shots so that I can actually just get all the detail that I'm looking for. I'm a detail fiend. I shoot with a high megapixel camera, as you know. And oh, you can make your cursor larger. So one of the tricks you can do is clicking the right bracket, which will make this larger. Let's say you go over an area that you didn't intend to go over, which happens a lot. Let's say I do that light after all. I'm like, oh no, I didn't mean to do that. You can hold down the Alt key, which will turn this into an eraser. And now you can erase the mask from around there. And then if you let go of the Alt key and let go of the clicker, let go of the mouse, the clicker, let go of the mouse, then you can return to just painting in the mask. And if you want to see what it looks like, you can just deselect that. And then maybe we want to boost the shadows a little bit more. Maybe boost the exposure a little bit more. And that's pretty good. So one of the things I also like to do is sometimes for long exposure shots like this, remember this shot is, we come up here and we see it's 30 seconds. So sometimes that can introduce some aberration that we don't get to clean up. So if I punch in on this image, I see a whole bunch of little speckled dot thingies, stars and chromatic aberration and things like that. So we want to clean this stuff up. So there's a couple ways to do it, depending on how much it bothers you. So my way of doing it is just to select the spot removal tool and just click on them. And so if you click on them, and the same thing, you can adjust the size of the spot removal tool with the brackets if you want, up and down. Oops, I'm going to accidentally hit P, which flags that as picked. And I want to unset that flag. So you can just click around on a bunch of these points. And then it will select a nearby point that it thinks is the right point. But let's say you don't want it to be that point, you want it to be this point, you can just click and drag the point it selects. But usually, for stuff like this, the point it's selected is fine. And then if you hold down the space bar, you get a hand tool, and then you can click and drag to move things around. And so, now, this is interesting because you won't see this most of the time. You won't see these little specks on here most of the time. One of the other things you can do with this tool, I just did that and failed to explain it to you, is click and drag. So hold down to click and drag, and then it'll select more than just a spot. It'll select the line that you pick. Hold down the space bar, move things around, click again. Sweet, we are getting rid of stuff. Now, unlike Photoshop, Lightroom doesn't really do layers in the same way. So like notice, remember I said I did a virtual copy, so here's my original image. Now let me click to fit. Here's my original image, here's the virtual copy that I've been working on with all of those, all the speck removers on it. And so it doesn't keep a layer like in Photoshop where you could just sort of step back through the history of what you've done. So if I scroll down to the bottom, it does, however, have a history. So in the History tab, I can see all the things I've changed. And if I hover over these changes, I can see in the top, in the navigation window in the top left, this basically shows me what each change has done to the image. And so I can kind of click through. And if you wanted to revert, I could click here. Now, Photoshop is a little better, of course, because you could keep the changes after it. So if I click here, I'm going to lose every change I've done on top of this. There may be a way not to do that. I'm not aware of it, but there may be a way not to do that. But in Photoshop, it's easy because you're doing everything on layers, and you can just remove that layer or modify the layer that you care about. Cool, so we're going to stay on the spot removal layer, and let's zoom back in and clean the rest of this up. Hold down the space bar. Oops, you can actually just move it around here. Okay, so I have a few more aberrations to clean up. Some of these things might be stars. You can tell the difference between like a star and an aberration because a star or something moving will be a streak, but sensor dust doesn't move and has weird coloration to it. So like that would be a super blue star, for instance. Probably not a super blue star or super red star. Again, something moving, so I click and drag, And I'm just clicking around, cleaning up my chromatic aberration. And then we can check out some of the presets on the left. But I really just wanted to give you a basic flow of some stuff that you can do safely to your image. I don't want it to select that point because that might be dirty. Something you can do safely to your image as you're getting started editing. And then you click done to make all those little dots go away. And then you drag around, see how we look. So when you're done, I'm on the hand tool right now. I don't need to hold down the space bar. Okay, I've got one more, a few more actually. So I'm going to click on that, click here, click here, click here. So I may have dust on my computer screen, so I might be chasing ghosts at this point. But one of the ways you can tell if you've got dust is if you move the image, if the dust moves with your image. That looks pretty good. There's a couple more up here. Yeah, one more. That one. Cool. All right, so Command minus, minus, minus to zoom out. That looks pretty good. And we could really call that done. So this looks pretty good to me. I've got some nice detail. I don't have any noise that I'm worried about. There are presets here on the left that you can try. So like you can sort of scroll through them and see if you like any of the effects that applies. I'm not actually interested in one of these effects right now, but sometimes one of the effects that I use is a punch. And so that is, if I scroll down to the Classic General, if I scroll down here, so when you notice when I hover over a preset, it actually previews it in the main screen for me so I can see what's happening. It can be a little chaotic on the eyes though, so I'm not sure I'm a fan of that update yet. So I can do punch, and then I'm just going to Command Z that to see if that made any difference. Yeah, so it actually made it a little darker in the front, so watch this. So punch, and then Command Z, undo the punch. Yeah, it makes it a little darker. Not a fan of that, so I'm gonna leave it as it is in terms of the image. And so I'm gonna hit the backslash, which is under my delete key or above my return key, and hit the backslash. So this is our before, and this is our after. Great. Now remember, this is a virtual copy, so I can see down here it's the original image, which is a JPEG, and copy 3. You're pretty astute. You're probably wondering, hey, B, you shoot in RAW, how come this is a JPEG? That is an outstanding question. I will answer that for you because you asked. Normally, for night shots, I will shoot it in RAW and just recover the shadows. Sometimes I try doing different versions of HDR. Now, at 30 seconds, my camera can't actually do a proper HDR, which is, well, I shouldn't say proper HDR. It can't do HDR how it normally does HDR, which is just changing the shutter speed. Because it won't do an exposure of longer than 30 seconds in manual mode. I have to then put it in bulb mode, which I don't mind, but sometimes that keeps me in a place longer than I really want to be doing, like 2 minutes and then 4 minutes and then 8 minutes to get all 3 shots. So I will sometimes shorten the exposure if the time doesn't make that much of a difference. And because of that, I have 3 shots that are combined in camera to give me the original image, which is HDR. This, of course, doesn't look like your traditional HDR image. What it does is it gives me a little bit of shadows, a little less highlights, and it gives me a slightly better starting point than just using, say, something like this, which is the pure RAW file. And so I started with the JPEG because I got just a little bit more out of it. So that's why it's a JPEG. And so the last thing to do, since I've got all of this, now remember, these edits haven't actually happened to the JPEG. This is a virtual copy. So then how do I get these edits to take place? I'm going to export them. And so I right click and I choose export. Now I have a preset save for this. So this is Brandon full-size JPEG, but I'm just going to go through what I would actually do for this. So in my export settings, I export them to my hard drive. I put them in a subfolder. So if you watch the import video, you see that I import a video, import the images with a particular name, and then I will put the edits, I will export the edits into a subfolder called edits. I will have it add to this catalog, If the file exists already, I will have it ask me what to do because that means like I have a couple different looks for the same original file. I don't, I just keep the file name. You could do all kinds of things. You can change the sequence number, you maybe use a custom file name, and then for settings, have it do JPEG, sRGP. I generally just get 100% quality, which will give me a pretty sizable JPEG. However, if I'm exporting this to share with somebody and they don't need like a super high resolution shot, remember it's a 50 megapixel camera, or I'm sharing it with somebody and I don't want them to have the super high resolution shot because it's my intellectual property and if they want a copy, I'm not going to give them the absolute best copy unless they've compensated me in some way. I don't just give away my work. And then I usually have it output sharpening for screen, although that depends. Like I may sharpen for print if this was something I'm going to print. I keep all the metadata. I don't add a watermark. You can consider adding a watermark if you're worried about somebody stealing your photos. And then I have it show in Finder. And so what that does is if I want to send the image, like sometimes I have a really great image and I love it, I want it to show me in Finder so that I can send it to someone. I'd be like, oh, look at this awesome image. So with that, those are my settings. And then I am going to export it. And then it tells me one already exists because, as you remember, I just said that if you edit the same image previously, so I have a previous edit of this. So I'm going to go ahead and use unique names so that it keeps both, and it'll just show me this one in the Finder. And then this I'm going to post on Instagram. This will be the image that we post on Instagram to invite people to watch the vlog to figure out how to do editing. And that's basically it. So when that's a pretty quick flow. I talked through a lot of those things and I glossed over a lot of those things. I'll go into more detail on those tools on future tutorials. But like just getting your feet wet, you should hopefully feel like it's actually not that daunting. There is a lot to it. This will go into a lot more detail, but just getting started, you can make pretty significant changes to your image pretty quickly. So give it a shot. If you have some questions, post them, and I will do my best to get you a solid answer. Have an amazing day, night, afternoon. Have an amazing life, and take photos of you having an amazing life. Do something interesting with your talent.